Welcome to the University of Leeds Building Capacity Project funded by JISC. This illustrated toolkit or roadmap is one of the project's outputs, and it demonstrates a recent learning journey related to a university strategic priority. A key strand of the Leeds Building Capacity Project is how we draw on current external JISC-funded projects to address the priority of improving effective feedback to our students. This project aims to achieve this through the use of technologies. So on this journey, what did we do? Well, at the outset, we asked ourselves some questions. How can technologies support timely and effective feedback for students? Should we have different forms of feedback for different kinds of assessment? And are some technologies contributing to enhancement, or are they additional to existing feedback practices? In using audio and video technologies, for example, we are also thinking about our teaching and learning styles and the need to distinguish between assessment and feedback as a measurement of achievement, that is, the difference between feedback that accompanies a mark, and feedback or feed forward given formatively as a qualitative part of the assessment process. And finally, is written feedback, which is still privileged over other forms, fitting for all students? Could technologies provide other more suitable forms of feedback? The next stage of the journey was to explore the extensive JISC database for projects using audio and video technologies in providing effective feedback. We selected 6 projects we thought might be appropriate for the Leeds context. Then we sought advice and endorsement from JISC on the adoption of these outputs from the chosen projects. At this point, we recognised the importance of a web presence for LBC and began building a website to highlight both the external projects and later on our own Leeds-based feedback projects. Do have a look at what we have done so far. The next stage of the journey was to raise awareness and stimulate interest among our academic and support staff in the use of these technologies. To do this, we organised an event called Effective Feedback Week, showcasing 3 of those 6 JISC projects, ending the event with a roundtable discussion to synthesise all the learning from the featured JISC projects. To initiate our discussions, 3 rapporteurs provided overviews of each one. Here is a snapshot of each of these project presentations, which can be seen in full on the project website. Firstly, Chant Chang from the Psychology Department at the University of Aberystwyth describes the AFL project, a comparison of 3 different kinds of audio and video feedback to students.
So the project that I was doing for JISC was part of the Learning and Teaching Innovation Grant. And it was a year-long project to compare different kinds of audio feedback. And as you may know, audio feedback has been used in the UK recently to address some of the problems that people have been experiencing with written feedback. So, for example, a lot of students complain that written feedback is not very deep, it's very shallow, it doesn't give priority to certain areas that they should concentrate on. Some of it is just plain illegible, they can't read their tutor's handwriting, and they tend to overemphasize areas of weakness so that it ends up being all about things that they've done wrong. They don't get a lot of positive reinforcement in this feedback. And all this contributes to this feedback being the least satisfied area in the National Student Survey, Satisfaction Survey.
Secondly, Will Stewart from the University of Bradford describes the ASIL project in collaboration with the University of Hertfordshire, focusing just on audio feedback across a range of disciplines.
Our project was called the Audio Supported Enhanced Learning Project. God knows why, but somebody came up with that because you always have to have an acronym, and it was sort of that was the closest thing we could come when we were actually trying to put this project together. So this afternoon I really just want to give you a sort of overview of the project and what we did and what sort of our research sort of showed. Maybe if you haven't heard audio feedback, what does it actually sound like? And what does audio sound like when you actually put it yourself? And maybe a discussion of how you could use audio in your own teaching. It was a joint project between ourselves at Bradford and Hertfordshire University. It's a 15-month project that was looking at the use of audio across the teaching and learning spectrum. So it wasn't just about feedback, it was about audio for a whole range of things. These are the areas of research that we were involved in across the two institutions. So we looked at the use of audio for self-reflection and self-assessment. Students using audio to reflect on their work, to reflect on their practice, and to self-assess themselves. We looked at the use of audio for formative and summative feedback. So lecturers, teachers giving feedback to their students. And we looked at the use of audio in collaborative group work. Students actually using audio again as part of projects and things like that.
And thirdly, Julian Park from the University of Reading and Steve Moore from UK Centre for Biosciences here at Leeds presents the ASSET project, which included both Reading and Plymouth universities. ASSET highlights the benefits of audio-video feed-forward, helpful information to prepare students for their assessments early on in the assessment life cycle, prior to submission, and also importantly, rapid generic feedback to students immediately after submitting their work.
What were we trying to achieve? Well, we were trying to explore the use of video in the provision of feedback. So that's the general theme. But we were also at the same time trying to think about how we could use that sustainably within the institution and to look at the barriers that were stopping some colleagues adopting video for feedback. And at the same time, we wanted to evaluate whether this was actually going to have any benefit for teaching and learning. So at the same time, at the back of this, and I will make some comments on the huge amount of data we've collected from staff and students, we're trying to evaluate if there is an impact on teaching and learning, or is this just another technological gimmick?
From the showcases, the round table enabled us to reflect on our own practice and on the use and benefits of audio and video technologies in enhancing feedback. It's really important to emphasise that this was not about a simple cut and paste from the JISC projects, but to use the outputs and outcomes as a catalyst for developing our own ideas fitting for our varied disciplinary contexts. In summary, the following advantages were highlighted in our discussion. Using audio and video technologies is an effective way to keep students warm and engaged in the assessment and feedback process. More feedback is possible in speaking than in writing, and the student's piece of work becomes the centre of staff and students' attention, and of course it's personalised. Also, this form of feedback can be easily stored and kept for posterity. It can also create the beginnings of a dialogue about feedback and learning between staff and students. And it can be applied across a range of assessments, particularly those that are practice-based. We did, however, note some particular challenges for both staff and students. Being able to access and have time to learn appropriate technologies. Having time to produce and make accessible this form of feedback to students, easier to do with a group than one-to-one. How the student voice could be included in creating a feedback dialogue. And how might we disseminate examples effectively across faculties? How would this form of feedback be viewed for audit purposes, for examples in the appeals process? And what about storage? And the size of video files if using voice tools compared to, say, audio files or more traditional forms of feedback? And of course, university infrastructures and software to support technologies and their costs. Further challenges were observed. Anonymous marking. How might this be managed? And being so personalised, With audio, is this a problem for a student to have a tutor in your ear? And also, staff video recording their feedback for public access. Might there be some resistance? The group discussion concluded with ideas for further development. Rapid generic feedback is particularly valuable when large groups of students are undertaking the same assessment. In fact, generic feedback following examinations could work very well too. The importance of using the student voice in providing feedback on certain assessments for following cohorts of students to learn from was seen as important. Staff could demonstrate via audio and video how modules and assessments had changed based on feedback from students. Students could also produce video clips of their own, linking up their feedback across a number of assessments to synthesise their learning. And why not adopt technologies already familiar to students, for example, the use of video? Using technologies for feedback also can emphasise to students where feedback occurs in the assessment cycle, not just associated with a summative mark. And further advantages were seen in the relative economies of pocket video cameras compared to more expensive technologies such as tablets and voice recognition software. Some key action points then emerged. Develop easy-to-use guides for staff and students. Pilot use of digital video cameras for generic fast feed-forward. Explore a university system for recording and storage, and develop appropriate infrastructures for its support. And lastly, recruit champions to adopt direct examples of audio and video feedback as pilots and also demonstrate good practice. In achieving our aims, we now have 10 effective feedback projects running across the university, all inspired by the outputs and outcomes of the JISC projects. These will be available on the project website over the coming academic year 2011-12, and the project leaders championing this initiative will be disseminating their project outcomes at a number of internal and external events. For example, the Leeds Learning and Teaching Conference in January 2012, and articles in the Leeds Student Education Bulletin. Although ventures of this kind are inevitably ongoing and open-ended, it's clear that although there are challenges in using audio and video technologies to improve feedback to students, the innovative work within selected JISC-funded projects has been a catalyst to inspire us with ideas for our own projects and enhancing our own practice. In so doing, this initiative contributes to providing an exceptional student experience here at Leeds.